On tonight's episode of Locked On Lightning, the Lightning flipped the script against the Flyers. We got Duclair and Dumba debuts, as well as looking forward to another long week. All that coming up and more on Locked On Lightning.
You're Locked On Lightning, your daily podcast on the Tampa Bay Lightning. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to another episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Adam Danker. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Locked On Lightning. Tonight, we're talking about the tables being turned against Philly. What does that mean? We'll break down the big win over the weekend. Dumba and Duclair making their debuts, as well as looking forward to another long couple of days off. But before we get into all that, I want to remind you that today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. And I also want to remind you, please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. Give us a follow wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. We're also available on YouTube. So go ahead, if you're watching us on YouTube, go ahead, comment below this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that thumbs up button. What was your reaction to this big win over the weekend? And just a recap for all of you that don't remember, the Lightning completely blew the doors off the Flyers over the weekend, 7-0 at home. It was a very special night. They were inducting Dave Andreychuk and Brad Richards into the Lightning Hall of Fame, and a lot of guys from the 2004 team were there, including former coach John Tortorella, who, of course, now is the coach of the Philadelphia Flyers. And what a good win all around in terms of the essence of who you were playing against, the historical factor when you tie in what Brad Richards and Dave Andreychuk mean to this team. And just so you guys are aware, I did do a recap or an analysis of the 2004 Stanley Cup final against Calgary. If you want to go back and listen to that, that's all the way back in like 2020 during the pandemic when we didn't have any hockey. I'm going to do it over this summer just to celebrate 20 years since the first championship in franchise history. So check in on that once the season ends. So it could be June, July, wherever. But you'll be notified. So as long as you follow the podcast, we'll do that. And I think that we'll do also kind of a look back on that Flyer series, because that was a big series that I think really, if the Lightning don't play the Flyers, and that series is as tense as it was, maybe they're not as prepared maybe for the physicality of what that Calgary series was. So keep an eye out for that once the season comes to a conclusion. But we're focusing on the present now, and what a interesting game from the Lightning. And this was a complete opposite of what, of course, I predicted on Friday's episode. And one of our listeners really did a good job and did not hesitate to point that out, which is fine. I mean, listen, I'd rather the Lightning prove me wrong in a positive way. And I will say, as good as this game was all around, and really the only things I had an issue with in this game was primarily there was a couple of turnovers that Vasilevsky had early on in the game that were just boneheaded moves, and he's no stranger to that. And we've seen those chances when he's given over that puck lead to goals, and just it's one of those things where the less amount of time that Vasilevsky has the puck, the better. I think there was one time there where actually Matt Dumba actually skated over to him and just told him to smother the puck. Don't even bother trying to shoot it out or try to pass it to somebody. within your own zone. But this game was everything that you would have wanted from the Tampa Bay Lightning, everything that we would have hoped to have seen from the Tampa Bay Lightning this season, and the first time that we've really seen them have it really come all together. And, there's a lot of factors there, and I'm not discounting how good of a win this was, but let's face it, the Flyers were really a depleted team. I think they only were playing with 5 defensemen. No, probably more. I think they were playing with probably 6, 7 defensemen. There's a flu bug going around in that locker room right now. And really, you could kind of say that maybe this Flyers team wasn't as strong as it normally is. And like I said, I'm not taking anything away from what this Lightning team did that game. They did phenomenal. They were very organized. They were very structured. They didn't take a lot of chances that they really primarily didn't really need to anyway. I thought that for the most part, these guys played very well in front of Vasilevsky. I thought that seeing Hedman score twice was a big deal. And that's also the frustrating thing when we see Hedman score, because more times than not, really what it comes down to is that he's probably doing something that he is probably hasn't done all season long. And really what that is, you saw in both chances there with him, was that really he was taking the puck deep into the high slot, something that in years past, especially on those playoff runs in which they repeated, that was something that was very key to the Lightning scoring in big time spots and him having the success that he did, especially the success that led to him winning the Conn Smythe. And that's something that we haven't really seen from him this year. And, there's a number of factors that play into that, one of which was just he has not looked like himself this year. He's looked very worn down and very weathered. And, the numbers might impress you when you first look at them, but if you're watching the games, it's not the full package with him. And that's really what you expect out of this guy, and that's what we haven't really seen this season. But if maybe, just maybe, especially when you look at the aggressiveness that he had, as well as all these other defensemen, and I have talked about it almost to exhaustion in the past, that this Lightning team plays a lot better when their defensemen are involved offensively. And, even if these guys didn't score goals, Darren Raddysh, he had three shots. He was very involved in this one, 5 assists in this game. Nick Pervix, he had a shot, and he was doing a good job though on the defensive side, which was really something, a game that we really needed to see out of him. Hedman had 3 shots in this game, like I said. Chernak unfortunately left this game early. I'm not entirely sure what's going on with him. He was hurt. He hurt his leg. Only played 12 and a half minutes in this one, but having Dumba and Fleury and, those guys being able to pick up the extra minutes, I thought that was key for the Lightning. And that was also kind of a trial by fire for Matt Dumba, even though he's a seasoned veteran and he's played in a tough conference. And I think that being in a new environment and being thrown to the fire like that, I think that's a good thing for him. And, it kind of, it almost washes away the nerves that you might have to start the game or throughout the course of the game. You're just playing on adrenaline, and I really liked what I saw out of him. And we'll talk more about him in the second half of this show. But a very good performance all around. Some honorable mentions as well. Vasilevsky, he made some saves early on that I think allowed him to kind of settle in, allowed him, it's one of those things where I would more primarily would like to see him make the big saves. I mean, he didn't really need to. I didn't think he was really challenged that much in this game. Another player that really impressed me was Connor Sheary. Very few times that we have said that this year. Sheary's goal was phenomenal. Picked up the puck right there in the slot, and he just risked it. And, I'm hoping that having goals in consecutive games kind of jump starts things. I'm not giving my hopes up for him, but a guy like that getting hot down the stretch, and you add Duclair to that mix, and you're getting the usual numbers from Braden Point and Nick Paul and Nikita Kucherov, that really sets yourself up for a really good stretch down the road, and it really hopefully allows you to stay in the playoff hunt, as well as be able to maybe I mean, I'm not giving my hopes up, but it's still not out of reach. They're only 8 points behind Toronto, so that could be something that we could look towards down the stretch. I mean, their goaltending isn't exactly pristine either, and the Lightning are going to have to be that scrappy team that's going to have to go down the stretch and just find ways to win games. And, we've seen now officially when everything goes right, what kind of team this is. And like I said, if you want to take it with a grain of salt, because of the fact that there wasn't a lot was going wrong for the Flyers, where they kind of looked like the Lightning against the Flames. I think that, maybe sometimes that's part of it. You just have to take advantage of teams on their bad nights. And we haven't really seen that this year. It's more so been allowing teams to get their act together and figure it out, and just letting them back into the games. The Lightning did not do that, and it was a great win all around and a very good night for the franchise as well. So let me know in the comments below how you feel about this. I mean, are we still kind of keeping our emotions in check when it comes to how excited we are about certain wins, especially the way they win games? I think that's probably a safe thing for now. Like I said, I'm not discounting this win. This is a big win. Anytime you drop 7 goals and don't allow any, that's cause for celebration. So I would say this is a phenomenal win, but you know what? You got to stay concentrated, and you got to look towards the next game and not dwell on the past one. So let me know in the comments below how you're feeling about that. And coming up on the next segment, we're going to be talking about Anthony Duclair and Matt Dumba, their first game in Tampa Bay. What does their presence mean to this team going forward, and how do they contribute in their first game in Tampa Bay? But before we get into all of that, I want to let you know and remind you, and not only remind you, but discuss one of our friends and our first sponsor of tonight's show, and that is our friends over at the Game Time app. Now, you shouldn't have to worry when you buy tickets to your next big event. Game Time is the fast and easiest way to buy tickets for all sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you, with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. They have all these phenomenal features like last-minute tickets, flash deals, zone deals, views from all seats in the venue, lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So as always, I want to thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. If you haven't already done so, please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. Give us a follow wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. We're also available on YouTube. Subscribe to our channel. Hit that notification bell so as soon as the newest episode drops, you'll be notified and be able to listen to it as well as watch it. So we just got done talking about recapping basically Saturday's game, which was a phenomenal game. Like I said, I know there's going to be people that are going to try and jump on me and say, can you just be happy for this team? I am. I think it was a very good win. I think it was that statement game that we've been looking for all season long. I always talk about it on this show, how this is a game that should be a statement game. You got to go out there and kick their butts. You got to go out there and own the ice. And the Lightning did that. They did that in this game. And they really made a statement, and they really made the Flyers just overall frustrated, and they didn't allow them to fight their way back into this game. And in my opinion, from what I saw on the ice, a large part of that success was, and not only that, just the way this team was carrying themselves was because of 2 new additions to this team, and that was Anthony Duclair and Matt Dumba, as you all, of course, have heard by now, if not already. that they were added to this team prior to the trade deadline. Duclair was Thursday, I believe, and Dumba was Friday. Dumba, I will say, was a very interesting addition to the team. I think at the time of the trade, I think that he was just a throw-in for Tampa. I think the goal of that trade was to get the draft pick. Duclair, obviously, I think was a little bit of another story. I think it was more so just kind of getting some more offensive help for this team, as, very disappointing year for Connor Sherry, and we've already voiced our opinions and frustrations about him and his lack of production this year. But like I said in the last segment, if he could get going and then you have Duclair added to the mix, this is going to be a pretty fun team to watch going down the stretch, especially if they have more performances like the one they did on Saturday. And I think having those two guys in the lineup really helped the team shift in another direction. We haven't seen the Lightning play that well. Definitely not this season. Going back to last season, I would probably have to say it was one of the wins in the Toronto series. Going back even farther, I can't, off the top of my head, I can't even remember. I mean, there was a couple of games like that last year where they didn't necessarily win by that big of a margin, but they did play that form of hockey, and I firmly believe those two guys had a great deal of influence on this game. On the offensive side, I think Anthony Duclair, like I've spoken about, 2 years removed from scoring 30 goals. He's been around the league forever. He's not even 30 yet. He's been in the league 10 years, and he's played in every type of situation almost that you could imagine. He's played on teams that were very, very good. He was in Florida previously before going to San Jose. He's been on teams that were not so good, San Jose. I mean, perfect example. So he's been at the highest of highs and he's been at the lowest of lows. And I think a guy like that coming into your locker room, who also has these previous connections to players on your team, he's very good friends with Matt Dumba. He was roommates with Braden Point when they're on the junior hockey championship team. And I know he knows a lot of other players on this team just from, being in the league so long. And that's a very important intangible to bring to this team. It's one thing when you bring a guy into the locker room that doesn't really know anybody that well. And it's, sometimes it could be tricky to kind of build that chemistry right away, especially with that pressure to get to hit the ground moving right away, especially when you're still trying to get to the playoffs or even just trying to make a run. And having a guy like that with that familiarity with a lot of these players, I think is a huge boost to this team. You saw it right away, the connection that he had with Stamkos on the ice. And that's a phenomenal connection that you're going to see hopefully going forward. And I think that having Duclair on the offensive side of things, as you saw, he was very involved on every shift that he was in. He's constantly all over the ice. He's taking shots from up high. He's doing the work down low. He made some very good passes in this game as well. Having a guy like that, I think, is really going to help the rest of the players just relax. It was one of those things this year. We've talked about it numerous times on the pod, how really he has, Nikita Kucherov has really been the only person that, other than, Braden Point and Brandon Hagel, but other than that, on a consistent nightly basis, you haven't seen anybody really step up like Nikita Kucherov has. And I'm not saying Anthony Duclair is going to be that guy, but I'm also saying it's going to help other guys settle in very quickly, because other teams are going to come into these matchups, whether you want to believe it or not. They're going to look at Anthony Duclair as a threat, and they're going to keep their eye on him, and that's going to leave opportunities open for other guys. And on the defensive side of things, Matt Dumba, he's not the most impressive player, and he's not going to jump off the page to you. But if you every shift or so, want to follow him exclusively around the ice. He's everywhere. He's directing traffic. He's talking to players between whistles. He's a leader. He's going to be one of those guys that is going to be a good glue guy on the ice and off the ice. And I think that is just as important as what you've seen from Duclair that we'll see in Dumba. Like I mentioned earlier, he went over to Vasilevsky, very casually said, listen, maybe don't. And I'm just assuming this is what he said. It looked like that's probably what he said, just hold on to the puck and, we'll take care of it off the face off. And he's a respected player that's coming into this locker room who's may not be here long term. I don't see that as something that may happen, but at the same time, if he happens to play himself onto this roster and plays well enough to where we all should say, you got to bring this guy back. I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to it as long as the number is right in terms of contract. And so I will say, as critical as I was of Julian Brees-Boss, and I think as rightfully so as I should have been, I would have to rate, those two acquisitions, hockey talent aside, I would have to rate them A's, solid A's, just because you're bringing two guys that are very likable, their personalities are very easy with their teammates, and you're going to be able to be very flexible with how you use them down the stretch, especially with some of the injury issues that they've had, especially on the defensive side of things. We all know Eric Chernak. He hasn't been the most healthiest or reliable this year. So, Dumba possibly being moved up to the second line or wherever he may be needed wouldn't be the worst thing in the world as long as he's playing well. And Duclair, like I stated, I think on Friday's episode, you could put him on the second line, you could put him on the third line, you could put him on the power play. He's a guy that could kind of do pretty much everything. So let me know in the comments below how you're feeling about that. I love these trades thus far. I think that this team was definitely a different team out there on the ice because of these guys. Even if they wouldn't have made an impact on this game, Duclair scored a goal. I think that their presence on the ice, just them being around these group of guys, I think showed, what kind of players they're going to be and whether or not we're going to like them or not. So wrapping things up in just a little bit, we're going to talk about another long break. What does that mean for this Lightning team and how can they continue, this level of performance with some pretty tough teams coming up in the near future. But before we get into that, I want to talk about our last sponsor of today's show, and that is our friends over at FanDuel. Now, say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tourney. Now, whether you're betting on the big upset or a one seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sports book. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. So wrapping things up, I just want to remind you and thank you for making us your first listen of the day. If you haven't already done so, please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. Give us a follow wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. We're also available on YouTube. Join our Discord server. We're on Reddit. The line of communications and the possibilities of communication are endless. You can also reach out to me on Twitter at DankyDank, DenkyDank. Tweet to me your predictions. Tweet to me how you're feeling about this team. Tweet to me about the trade deadline. Tweet to me about the schedule going forward. I will answer everything and anything that is of your concern with the Tampa Bay Lightning. So we're talking about this long break that the Tampa Bay Lightning will be having coming up this week. I'm not personally a fan of it. I don't think anybody is, let's be honest here. But I will say that it's definitely something that this team needs, considering what they got ahead of them this week. And so Thursday, they're at home against the Rangers. Saturday, they're in Miami or wherever you want to classify the Panthers being. And then next Tuesday, they're going to be in Vegas starting a West Coast trip. And like I stated before, these are 3 Stanley Cup contenders, serious contenders. I don't care how you feel about Vegas, especially them being in the wild card, but these are going to be 3 very, very difficult games. The Lightning are going to need all the rest they're going to need, but at the same time, the key here to getting back into the mix of it, and not only getting back into the mix of it, but capitalizing on that weekend win against the Flyers, another playoff team. They're going to need to stay concentrated. They're going to need to understand, which this goes without saying, and these guys are all professionals, so I hope that they're aware of this. You know, you're not going to go out there and score 7 goals on the Rangers. Then again, maybe if Shesterkin's in goal, maybe that's a little bit of a different story. Quick, I don't think so. And you're just going to need to go out there and look at the first couple of periods of the game against the Flyers and replicate that in practice as much as possible, because really that is an important thing for the Tampa Bay Lightning. Is the first 2 periods were as perfect of hockey as you could probably get for this team. And that says a lot. And I don't think that there was many teams this year. Granted, I have not watched all 32 teams. I would be hard-pressed to find out if there was any other team, and I'm sure there was, or maybe not, but I would probably say that there wasn't many teams this year that have played better in a single period than the Lightning did in these first 2 periods against the Flyers. And if they don't necessarily have to replicate the goal output, but if they could go out and play with the amount of discipline, with the amount of intensity, with the amount of the level of structure that this team had, like I said, they didn't take any unnecessary chances. They played very good defense. They bottled up the Flyers very quickly on shooting lanes, zone entries. They did it all. They made Andrei Vasilevsky's life significantly easier than it has been all season long. If they could do that, everything else, as I always say, will fall into place. And I truly mean that. You know, whether or not we may or may not have Eric Chernak this upcoming game, I think that you have built a good enough of a base for yourselves with what you know going into the Flyer game, then from what you got out of that game, with essentially the team you're going to have for the rest of the year, to officially figure out what it is you need to do going forward to win. And I will expect Andrei Vasilevsky to play in all 3 of those games. I don't see a reason as to why he shouldn't. If I had to guess if he's going to give Johansson a game, which honestly, as much as I would love to see Vasilevsky play out the rest of the season, I would imagine, you know, he's probably going to get there's one back-to-back in April up in Canada. But as much as I would like to see Vasilevsky play out the rest of the season, I think that we might see Johansson on Saturday, which at the end of the day isn't that big of a change considering how poor Vasilevsky has played at times this year. And it'll also test this team because, like I've said, like some listeners on this show have also said, there's been moments in the past where this team has heavily relied on Vazzy and he's bailed them out. Now this year, the script has completely flipped, and it is now Vazzy needing this team to bail them out. So basically, unless Johansson goes out there and shows us the same goaltender from the first month of the season, he's going to need the same out of this team. And I think that is going to be a good test for this Lightning team. And I think that the Lightning now going forward, especially with a lot of days off here and there, they're going to need to figure out a style of hockey that is suitable after long layoffs. And that style of hockey is the one that we saw this past Saturday against the Philadelphia Flyers. So let me know in the comments below how you're feeling about all this. Does the extra days off worry you? Are we going to see a repeat against the Rangers that we saw against the Flames? Are we going to continue to get better as the season progresses? Are Duclair and Dumba make or break for this Lightning team down the stretch? And can they hold on to that wild card spot? Because they're in a very good spot right now. They're 2 points ahead of the Islanders. They're as well as 2 points ahead of the Red Wings, who have been slipping. And, you know, it's a really fun time for Lightning hockey because now we're starting to look at some positives, and we have some positives to look at for this team down the stretch. So we'll be back tomorrow with another episode, maybe to answer some of those questions, maybe some questions that you might have. Drop in the comment section below this video. I'll answer them all tomorrow on tomorrow's episode. So go ahead and do that. So that's been it for this episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Adam Danker. I'll talk to you in the next one.